My grandmother tried to force me into an arranged marriage at 16, so I exposed her entire human trafficking operation. I should have known something was wrong when grandmother Violeta started measuring my hips at breakfast. Not casually, with an actual tape measure while I was trying to eat cereal. 34 inches, she announced to my mother, scribbling notes in her leather book. Perfect breeding proportions. I nearly choked on my Lucky Charms. What's happening? I asked, but Mom just stared into her coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. For 3 months, strange men had been visiting our house. They'd sit in grandmother's parlor, drinking tea while she paraded me around like a show pony. I was told they were business associates, but something about their stares made my skin crawl. The truth hit me when I found the contracts. I was looking for my birth certificate when I discovered grandmother's filing cabinet wasn't locked. Inside were dozens of folders labeled with girls' names, ages, and what looked like invoices. My hands shook as I opened the folder marked Esperanza, age 16. That was me. Esperanza was my real name, though everyone called me Essie. The papers inside made me sick. Medical records I'd never consented to. Photos someone had taken without my knowledge. And worst of all, a signed contract between my grandmother and someone named Dmitry Kozlov for $45,000. I was being sold. The medical records were horrifying. They detailed everything. Confirmation I was still a virgin, fertility assessments, even dental records. At the bottom, in grandmother's handwriting, delivery date, March 15th, payment upon receipt. March 15th was next week. That night, I pretended to have food poisoning and stayed in my room, photographing every document. There were 17 other girls' files. Some I recognized from school. Others were unfamiliar, with notes like delivered to client or payment complete. One file made me physically vomit. A girl named Luna, only 14, with a bright red deceased stamp across her photo. I had stumbled onto something much bigger than an arranged marriage. The next morning, grandmother announced my wedding to the family. Essie will be moving to Eastern Europe next week, she said over pancakes, as casually as discussing the weather. She's marrying a successful businessman who will provide well for her. My father looked confused. Since when? Since it was decided, grandmother cut him off with a look that could freeze hell. I excused myself and called my cousin Ricardo, who was studying criminal justice. When I sent him the photos, his response was immediate. Holy shit, Essie. This is human trafficking. Call the FBI. Now. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because that afternoon, I overheard grandmother coordinating with someone about other girls being moved the same week. This was happening to others right now. I needed more evidence. For 3 days, I became a spy in my own home. I recorded conversations, photographed visitor license plates, and documented every detail. She had been doing this for years, selling girls from our community to buyers overseas. The breaking point came when I discovered they planned to drug me. She's been asking too many questions, I heard grandmother tell someone. Give her the sedative in her morning orange juice. She'll sleep until Prague. Prague. I was being shipped to Prague like cargo. That night, I created a digital evidence package, photos, audio recordings, financial records. I uploaded it all to a secure cloud drive and prepared to send it to the FBI, local police, and media outlets. But first, I had one more thing to do. The next morning, grandmother gathered the family for my farewell breakfast. Mom sat crying. Dad looked lost. My little brother Diego kept asking why I had to leave. As grandmother raised her orange juice in a toast to new beginnings, I stood up. Before we toast, I said, pulling out my phone, I have something to share. I hit play on the recording of her discussing my sale price. The room went dead silent. You sick bitch, my father whispered, finally understanding. Grandmother lunged for my phone, but I was faster. I'd already hit send on 18 different emails. Too late, I said. The FBI should be here any minute. And that's when she told me something that made my blood run cold. You stupid girl, she hissed. You have no idea how deep this goes. Your precious family is already on the list. Your mother agreed to this. Your father signed the papers. I turned to look at my parents. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad's face had gone white as fresh snow. What is she talking about? I demanded, my voice cracking like brittle glass. The silence stretched until my mother finally broke, her words coming out in broken sobs. We owed them money, she whispered, her hands shaking around her coffee cup. Gambling debts. Your father's gambling debts. They said this was the only way to make it right. My father stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair with a crash that echoed through our small dining room. Violeta said it was just an arranged marriage, he said desperately, his voice rising to almost a shout. Rich husband, good life in Europe. She never told us. Never said what? Grandmother laughed bitterly, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Never said you were selling your daughter to pay off your poker losses? Never said these men don't take wives, they take slaves? Never said half these girls end up dead within a year? The room started spinning. My own parents had sold me. My own blood, my own flesh and bone had put a price tag on my head and shaken hands on the deal. That's when the front door exploded open with a crash that shook the entire house. FBI! Everyone on the ground! Hands where we can see them! Agents flooded our dining room in full tactical gear, automatic weapons drawn, shouting commands that barely registered through the roaring in my ears. In the chaos, I saw grandmother frantically trying to destroy papers, stuffing them in her mouth and chewing desperately. My mother collapsed sobbing on the linoleum floor. My father was being handcuffed, his face a mask of confusion and terror. Agent Patricia Torres found me huddled in the corner behind the overturned chair, still clutching my phone like a lifeline. Are you Esperanza Morales? She asked gently, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising calm. I nodded, unable to speak. You're safe now, honey. Your evidence package was incredibly thorough. We've been tracking this network for 8 months, but we never had an inside source with this level of access. Over the next several hours, sitting in a sterile FBI conference room with terrible fluorescent lighting, I learned the full scope of what grandmother had been orchestrating. Her Blessed Union's cultural marriage services was a front for an international trafficking ring that spanned 3 continents. She'd been operating for 15 years, targeting families in financial distress throughout Latino communities across the Southwest and convincing them to marry off their daughters for debt forgiveness and promises of prosperity. The girls were never seen again. Luna, the 14-year-old whose file I'd found with the red deceased stamp, had died trying to escape a brothel in Moldova after being beaten so severely she suffered internal bleeding. 17 other girls had simply vanished into the network, their families receiving occasional fake letters and photos to maintain the illusion they were living happy, married lives. Your grandmother was what we call a Tier 1 recruiter, Agent Torres explained, sliding a thick folder across the metal table. She identified vulnerable families, built trust within communities through church connections and cultural organizations, then exploited desperate financial situations to convince parents they were doing what was best for their daughters. The financial records I'd photographed revealed transactions totaling over $2 million across multiple years, with individual sales ranging from $25,000 for younger girls to $65,000 for older teenagers with specific physical characteristics buyers had requested. Agent Torres opened the folder to reveal surveillance photos I'd never seen before. Pictures of grandmother meeting with men in expensive suits at upscale restaurants, exchanging briefcases in hotel parking lots, even boarding private jets with young girls who looked terrified and confused. We've been building this case since 2019, she continued. But trafficking networks are like icebergs. We could only see the tip. Your evidence gave us the entire underwater structure. During questioning, more family secrets emerged that made my stomach turn. My parents had been in debt for $47,000 from Dad's gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control over 3 years. What started as occasional poker games had escalated to daily casino visits, online betting, and eventually desperate loans from increasingly dangerous people. Grandmother had offered to clear the entire debt in exchange for me, presenting herself as a savior, offering a solution that would benefit everyone involved. She had photographs, my mother sobbed during her interrogation, her mascara creating black rivers down her cheeks, pictures of other girls who'd married through her service. Beautiful houses, expensive clothes, jewelry. She said Essie would live like a princess in Europe, that these men specifically wanted American wives they could spoil and pamper. But the medical exams grandmother had secretly arranged through her network told a completely different story. The buyers weren't looking for wives to spoil. They were purchasing young, healthy girls for exploitation in various forms of forced labor, including prostitution, domestic servitude, and in some cases organ harvesting. Did you know about the other girls in your community who had gone missing? Agent Torres asked my parents during their second day of questioning. My mother broke down completely, her entire body shaking with sobs that sounded like they were being torn from her soul. We suspected something was wrong when the Ramirez girl went missing last year, she confessed. Rosa was only 15 when she left for her wedding in Romania. Her mother kept asking Violeta for more contact information, saying the letters Rosa was sending didn't sound like her voice. But Violeta always had explanations: cultural adjustment, learning a new language, being busy with her new wealthy lifestyle. The letters were fake. Rosa Ramirez had been killed 6 months after her wedding while trying to escape a trafficking compound in Bucharest. Her body was never recovered. Agent Torres slid another photograph across the table, a surveillance image from Romanian police showing a young girl who looked like Rosa being forced into a van outside a train station. This was taken 2 days before she died, Agent Torres said quietly. She'd managed to escape the compound and made it almost to the embassy before they caught her. My father, sitting in his orange jail jumpsuit, stared at the photo with haunted eyes. How many? He whispered. How many girls did we help kill by staying silent? 46. Agent Torres replied without hesitation. That's how many girls your mother-in-law trafficked during her 15-year operation. Esperanza would have been number 47. 3 days later, the coordinated raids began. Using my evidence and testimony, along with months of FBI surveillance, agents simultaneously struck 12 locations across 4 states. The operation involved over 200 federal agents, local police officers, and international law enforcement partners. They arrested grandmother at 6 a.m. while she was trying to flee to Mexico with 3 suitcases full of cash and fake identification documents. She fought like a wildcat, scratching one agent's face and biting another before they could get the handcuffs on her. Dmitry Kozlov, who was actually Viktor Petrov, a convicted trafficker who'd been on Interpol's most wanted list for 7 years, was arrested at a luxury hotel in Phoenix where he'd been waiting for my delivery. When agents broke down his door, they found him with detailed plans for transporting 4 girls to various international destinations that same week. The safe house where I was supposed to be taken was raided simultaneously by a joint task force. Located in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson, it had been set up to look like a legitimate shipping business from the outside. Inside, they found 4 other girls. Carmen Vasquez, 17, from El Paso, had been held there for 3 weeks. She'd lost 30 pounds and had visible track marks on her arms from sedatives they'd been using to keep her compliant. Sofia Mendoza, 15, from San Antonio, had been there for 10 days. Her marriage to a businessman in Ukraine had been scheduled for the following week. Isabella Rodriguez, 16, from Phoenix, had arrived just 2 days before the raid. She was still fighting them, still had fire in her eyes, still believed someone would come looking for her. And Arya Chen, 14, the youngest, who'd been trafficked from Los Angeles after her family was convinced she was being adopted by a wealthy American couple who wanted to give her educational opportunities they couldn't afford. All 4 girls were rescued alive, though the psychological trauma would take years to heal. The media coverage was intense and unrelenting. Local news stations called it the largest human trafficking bust in state history. National outlets picked up the story when they learned a 16-year-old girl had single-handedly exposed an international trafficking network by documenting her own attempted sale. CNN interviewed me via satellite from the FBI safe house where I was staying. "What made you realize you had to document everything instead of just running away?" Anderson Cooper asked. "I found Luna's file," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She was 14 when they killed her. I kept thinking about all the other Lunas who might be saved if someone could prove what was really happening. I couldn't live with myself if I escaped, but left the door open for them to keep destroying lives. But the aftermath wasn't what I expected. My family didn't just fall apart. It disintegrated completely, like a house of cards in a hurricane. Dad was charged as an accessory to human trafficking, but got a plea deal for cooperating fully with prosecutors and providing detailed information about grandmother's operation. He received 5 years in federal prison, but would serve only 18 months with good behavior and continued cooperation. Mom was charged with child endangerment and conspiracy, but avoided prison time by agreeing to 3 years of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service with anti-trafficking organizations. Diego, my 12-year-old brother, went to live with our Aunt Carmen in Denver. He was too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, but old enough to know our family had been destroyed by choices the adults made. The first time I saw him after the arrests, he wouldn't look at me. "Why did you have to tell?" he asked quietly, his small hands twisted together in his lap. "Now everyone at school knows what our family did. Now I don't have a mom or dad anymore. It broke my heart into pieces so small I wasn't sure they could ever be put back together." I testified against grandmother at her trial, which lasted 6 weeks and made national headlines daily. She showed no remorse whatsoever, even when faced with 17 counts of human trafficking, 6 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and dozens of other federal charges connected to girls who died in the network. Her defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance, a woman who'd grown up in poverty and abuse who was simply trying to help families escape similar situations. But when the prosecutor asked her directly about Luna, about Rosa, about the other girls whose deaths were directly connected to her trafficking operation, she showed her true nature. "These girls had better lives than what they were leaving," she said coldly, her voice carrying the same tone she'd used when discussing my hip measurements. "I gave them opportunities they never would have had otherwise. If some of them were too weak to adapt to their new circumstances, that's not my responsibility." The courtroom was dead silent. Even her own attorney looked sick. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd been handling trafficking cases for over 20 years, leaned forward with an expression of barely controlled disgust. "Ma'am, you facilitated the sale, rape, torture, and murder of dozens of children for profit. You destroyed families, traumatized communities, and showed absolutely no regard for human life. This court finds you to be a dangerous predator who poses an ongoing threat to society." She sentenced grandmother to life without the possibility of parole, plus 300 additional years to run consecutively. As they led her away in shackles, grandmother turned to look directly at me in the witness gallery. Her eyes were filled with pure hatred, but also something else, fear. For the first time in my life, the woman who had terrified me since childhood looked small and powerless. During the trial, I learned even more disturbing details about the scope of the operation. Grandmother had been abused and sold herself as a young girl in Mexico, trafficked across the border at age 13 by men who promised her family she'd find work as a maid for wealthy Americans. Instead, she spent 3 years in forced prostitution before escaping during a police raid in El Paso. Rather than breaking the cycle of abuse, she'd decided to profit from it, convincing herself that she was giving girls opportunities while building a network that generated millions in revenue. "Trauma doesn't excuse evil," Agent Torres told me after the sentencing. "Some people who experience horrific abuse dedicate their lives to protecting others from the same fate. Others become predators themselves, perpetuating the cycle because they've learned to see exploitation as normal." The psychological evaluation conducted by federal experts revealed that grandmother had been operating similar trafficking networks in New Mexico, Texas, and California over the past 20 years. I was number 46 on her master list of trafficked girls. 6 months after the trial ended, I was invited to testify before Congress about gaps in human trafficking prevention and prosecution. Standing at that podium in the House of Representatives, looking out at dozens of lawmakers who had the power to change systems, I thought about Luna, about Rosa, about all the girls whose names I'd never learn. "The average age of entry into trafficking in the United States is 12 to 14 years old, I told them, reading from testimony I'd prepared with help from victim advocates. "These aren't strangers snatching children off the street. 83% of trafficking victims are trafficked by people they know and trust. Family members, family friends, romantic partners, and community leaders." The Esperanza Act was passed unanimously 4 months later. It requires extensive background checks for international marriage brokers, creates stronger federal penalties for family members who knowingly participate in trafficking, establishes mandatory training for school counselors and teachers to identify trafficking victims, and provides funding for survivor services. The bill was signed into law on Luna's birthday. She would have turned 18 that day. The rescued girls and I stay in close touch through a support group that meets every month. We call ourselves the Phoenix Sisters, women who rose from the ashes of what was supposed to destroy us. Carmen, who'd lost so much weight in the safe house, is now studying to become a nutritionist, wanting to help other trauma survivors rebuild their relationships with food and their bodies. Sophia, the 15-year-old who is supposed to be shipped to Ukraine, is studying international law with plans to work for organizations that combat trafficking worldwide. Isabella, who never stopped fighting even in captivity, became a self-defense instructor who teaches free classes for at-risk girls in her community. Aria, the youngest at 14, is now in therapy and doing well in school, but still struggles with trust issues and nightmares. She's the reminder that some trauma takes years to heal, if it ever fully heals at all. We support each other through the difficult days, the anniversaries of our near trafficking, the moments when memories overwhelm us, the times when well-meaning people ask intrusive questions about our experiences. During one particularly difficult group session, Sophia asked a question that haunted all of us. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Essie hadn't been brave enough to document everything? How many more girls would have disappeared? Agent Torres, who sometimes joined our group sessions, answered honestly, based on the intelligence we gathered, the network was expanding rapidly. They had plans to begin recruiting from middle schools, targeting even younger girls. Without Esperanza's evidence, we estimate they would have trafficked at least 50 more victims in the following year alone. 50 more Lunas, 50 more Rosas, 50 more girls whose families would receive fake letters while their daughters suffered unimaginable horrors. Dad got out of prison after 18 months, exactly as predicted. He'd been a model prisoner, participating in every counseling program available, leading a Gamblers Anonymous group, and continuing to cooperate with ongoing trafficking investigations. He wrote me letters constantly during his incarceration, long, rambling confessions about his gambling addiction, desperate apologies for what he'd allowed to happen, promises that he'd changed, pleas for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. I know I don't deserve it, his final letter read, but I hope someday you can find it in your heart to let me try to be your father again. I failed you in the worst possible way, but I want to spend the rest of my life making it right. I never wrote back. When he was released, he moved to a halfway house in Albuquerque and got a job washing dishes at a diner. He started attending meetings for parents of trafficking victims, speaking about the warning signs he'd ignored, the desperation that had made him vulnerable to grandmother's manipulation. But I couldn't bring myself to see him. Every time I thought about that breakfast table, about him signing papers that put a price on my life, the anger rose up like bile in my throat. Mom had a different kind of breakdown after the trial. She developed severe agoraphobia and couldn't leave her apartment for months. She lost her job, had to move to a smaller place, and started drinking heavily to cope with the guilt and shame. She sent birthday cards every year that I threw away unopened. She left voicemails that I deleted without listening to. She reached out through Aunt Carmen, begging for just one chance to explain, to apologize, to try to repair what she'd helped destroy. But I couldn't forgive her either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because she'd had a choice. When grandmother presented that contract, when those men came to evaluate me like livestock, when the medical exams were scheduled, she'd had opportunities to say no, to protect me, to find another solution. Instead, she'd chosen to save herself and sacrifice me. Diego wrote to me sometimes from Denver. Aunt Carmen sent pictures of him playing baseball, graduating 8th grade, smiling with friends. He was healing in ways the rest of us couldn't. But in his letters, I could sense the weight he carried, the knowledge that his family had been willing to sell his sister, the confusion about why everything had to fall apart, the fear that people would always see him as connected to the trafficking operation. Do you hate Mom and Dad? He asked in one letter. I stared at that question for hours before writing back. I don't hate them, I finally replied, but I can't trust them. And I can't pretend that what they did was okay just because they were scared or desperate. Some things can't be forgiven, even by family. Last year, I got a call from Agent Torres that changed everything. We found something you should know about, she said, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when delivering news that could be good or devastating. They discovered grandmother's real records, not the files I'd found in her cabinet, but her actual master database, hidden in a safety deposit box registered under a fake name in 3 different states. She kept detailed notes about every girl she'd trafficked over 20 years, Agent Torres explained, including their final locations, the buyers' real identities, and in some cases, what happened to them after the sales were completed. My heart stopped. Luna, we've been able to rescue 3 more girls using her information, Agent Torres said. They're alive because of your courage to expose this network when you did. Luna, the 14-year-old I thought was dead based on the deceased stamp in her file, was actually being held in a compound in Bulgaria. The death certificate had been forged to close her case and stop any family inquiries. When Bulgarian authorities raided the location based on grandmother's intelligence, they found Luna, now 17, along with 8 other trafficking victims from various countries. She'd been forced into prostitution for 3 years, had suffered multiple injuries and infections, and had tried to kill herself twice, but she was alive. The first time I spoke to Luna via video call, arranged through victim services and international law enforcement, I barely recognized the laughing girl from the school photos I'd seen in her file. She was painfully thin, her hair had been shaved off, and she had scars on her arms that told stories I didn't want to imagine. But her eyes still held fire. You saved my life, she said in accented English she'd learned during recovery. When police came, they said American girl named Esperanza gave them information to find us. I knew it was you from the news stories. I started crying and couldn't stop. I thought you were dead, I whispered. I saw the stamp in your file. I thought I was too late to help you. You were not too late, she said firmly. Every day in that place I hoped someone would come. I never stopped believing, and you made it happen. Luna is now in intensive therapy and rehabilitation in Bulgaria, working with organizations that help trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. She wants to become a social worker to help other girls who experience what she experienced. The 2 other rescued girls were Maria Santos from Honduras, who'd been trafficked at 15 and held for 2 years in a domestic servitude situation in Germany, and Yuki Tanaka from Japan, who'd been sold into forced labor in a factory in Thailand at age 16. All 3 girls credit my exposure of the network with saving their lives. We've been able to rescue 3 girls and prosecute 17 additional traffickers using the intelligence from your grandmother's records, Agent Torres told me. But there's something else. We've identified 12 other families who were targeted by the network but didn't go through with the transactions. Your case going public scared them away from participating. 12 more families. 12 more girls who didn't disappear because other parents saw the news coverage and realized what they'd almost done to their own daughters. The ripple effects kept spreading. Detective Maria Gutierrez from Phoenix PD started a task force specifically focused on family-facilitated trafficking after seeing how common it was in grandmother's network. People think trafficking is always strangers grabbing kids, she told a reporter. But family trafficking is actually the fastest growing category we're seeing. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, people who are supposed to protect children, selling them to pay debts, support drug habits, or just for money. The task force has investigated 47 cases in 3 years and rescued 23 children from family trafficking situations. I'm 19 now, starting my sophomore year at Georgetown University, with a full scholarship funded by donations from people who heard my story. I'm double majoring in international law and psychology, with plans to work for organizations that combat trafficking worldwide. My dorm room is covered with photos of Luna, Carmen, Sophia, Isabella, and Aria. Reminders of why I survived, why I spoke up, why I can never stop fighting for girls who are still trapped in the network that was supposed to consume me. Every semester, I get letters from girls who've escaped trafficking situations after learning about warning signs from news coverage of my case. A 15-year-old in Texas called the trafficking hotline when her aunt started arranging her marriage to an older man, leading to the discovery of a network targeting girls in immigrant communities. A 16-year-old in California recognized the manipulation tactics her boyfriend was using to isolate her from family and friends, realizing he was grooming her for trafficking before it escalated. A 14-year-old in Florida told her school counselor when her stepfather started talking about introducing her to business opportunities with his friends, preventing what investigators later determined would have been a sale into domestic servitude. These are the victories that keep me going when the nightmares come. When I wake up in cold sweats thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't found those files, if I hadn't been brave enough to document everything, if I just tried to run instead of fighting back. Last month, I received a letter that made me realize how far the consequences of my choice had reached. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a researcher at Johns Hopkins who studies family trafficking patterns, wrote to tell me that my case had become a cornerstone study in her field. The documentation you gathered and the courage you showed in exposing your own family's participation has fundamentally changed how we understand and combat trafficking, she wrote. Your case is taught in criminal justice programs, social work schools, and law enforcement academies across the country. The Esperanza Protocol is now standard procedure when investigating suspected trafficking cases, looking for family involvement, documenting financial motivations, and understanding how traffickers manipulate cultural expectations and economic desperation to convince families to participate in selling their children. But the letter that affected me most came from an unexpected source. Viktor Petrov, the man who was supposed to be my husband, wrote to me from federal prison where he's serving life without parole. You destroyed my life, his letter began, and I almost threw it away immediately. But something made me keep reading. I have spent 3 years in this cell thinking about what you did, and I realize now that you destroyed the life of a monster. You saved those girls, but you also saved me from becoming even worse than I already was. He went on to describe his own childhood in Russia, how he'd been sold by his family to criminal organizations at age 12, how years of abuse had turned him into someone who saw children as commodities instead of human beings. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he wrote. I'm not asking for sympathy. I am telling you that what you did was right, and brave, and necessary. You stopped me from destroying more lives. You stopped your grandmother from destroying more families. You changed everything. At the end of the letter, he included information about 3 other trafficking networks he'd worked with during his criminal career, details he was sharing with federal prosecutors in hopes that more victims could be rescued. I forwarded his letter to Agent Torres, who confirmed that his information had already led to 2 more arrests and the rescue of 1 additional trafficking victim. Even the man who was supposed to destroy my life had been changed by my choice to fight back. When people ask if I regret exposing my family, if I regret destroying the only life I'd ever known, I think about Luna video calling me from Bulgaria to show me the painting she'd finished in art therapy. I think about Carmen teaching a self-defense class to middle school girls, empowering them to protect themselves. I think about Sophia interning with an international human rights organization, using her experience to help draft policies that protect trafficking victims. I think about Isabella speaking at conferences about survivor empowerment, refusing to let her trauma define her limitations. I think about Aria, still healing but alive, still fighting, still believing that the world can be good despite everything she's endured. I think about the 43 other girls on grandmother's list who will never be sold because the network is destroyed. I think about the 12 families who decided not to participate after seeing the consequences of what my family did. I think about the investigators who use my case to recognize warning signs in other families. I think about the laws that have changed because lawmakers saw what happens when trafficking hides behind cultural traditions and family authority. And I remember what grandmother said during her final phone call from prison, 6 months before she died of a heart attack in her cell. You destroyed your own family, she hissed, her voice as cold and bitter as ever. Was it worth it? Was destroying everyone you loved worth saving a few strangers? I thought about Diego, who was safe with Aunt Carmen and thriving in school, no longer living in a house where children could be sold to pay adult debts. I thought about the girls who were alive because I spoke up, because I documented everything, because I chose truth over family loyalty. I thought about the families who would never face this choice because the network that preyed on them was gone. Yes, I told her, my voice steady and sure, it was worth it. Saving those girls was worth everything, and I hung up on her forever. 3 years later, I still believe that. Even on the hard days, even when I miss having a family, even when I wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd just kept quiet and found another way to escape. Because some things are more important than family loyalty. Some things are more important than keeping secrets. Some fights are worth losing everything for. And some choices once made define who you are forever. I chose to be someone who protects children instead of someone who stays silent while they're destroyed. I chose to be someone who documents truth instead of someone who lives comfortable lies. I chose to be someone who breaks cycles instead of someone who perpetuates them. And every day when I wake up in my dorm room covered with photos of survivors, when I read letters from girls who escaped because of warnings my case provided, when I study international law so I can fight trafficking on a global scale, I know I made the right choice, even if it cost me everything I thought I wanted, even if it meant losing the family I thought I needed, even if it meant growing up faster than any 16-year-old should have to. Because the girls who lived, they were worth it. They are worth it. They will always be worth it. And as long as I have breath in my body and fight in my spirit, I'll keep making sure other girls know they're worth fighting for too. I thought my father's will was fair to everyone, but when the lawyer read the real one, my sister's face went white. We'd gathered in the mahogany-paneled office expecting the usual, split evenly between the three of us kids. Dad had promised as much during his final weeks in hospice. Everything equal, he'd wheezed through the oxygen mask. No favorites. The lawyer cleared his throat. To my eldest daughter, Celeste, I leave my entire estate, all holdings, and the family business. My brother dropped his coffee. The ceramic shattered across the Persian rug. To my son, the lawyer continued, I leave the contents of safety deposit box 447 at First National. And to my youngest daughter, he paused, adjusting his glasses, I leave nothing but the truth. Celeste hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. Her knuckles were white against the leather armchair. There must be a mistake, my brother stammered. The lawyer shook his head. There's more. A letter to be read after the monetary distributions. That night, I couldn't stop replaying Celeste's expression. Not surprise, not joy, terror. 3 days later, my brother texted, need to see you, now. I found him in his apartment, surrounded by documents from the safety deposit box. His face was pale. Dad wasn't who we thought he was, he said. He handed me a photograph. 3 children at a beach. One was clearly young Celeste. The other 2 I didn't recognize. The back read, Summer 1987. Before the switch. What switch? I asked. He showed me adoption papers, DNA tests, hospital records, all dated 6 months before Celeste was supposedly born. She's not our sister, he whispered. Dad took her. My blood went cold. Took her from where? The next document answered that. A newspaper clipping, 3-year-old vanishes from park. Parents offer $2 million reward. The photo showed a little girl who looked exactly like Celeste at that age. I drove to Celeste's house at midnight. She answered the door fully dressed, suitcases by the entrance. You know, she said. It wasn't a question. How long have you known? I asked. Since I was 16. Found my real birth certificate in Dad's safe. Her voice was hollow. He told me if I ever said anything, he'd make sure my biological parents thought I was dead. But he's dead now, I said. You're free. She laughed bitterly. Am I? He left me everything for a reason. The business, the properties. They're all built on blood money. He knew I'd have to choose. Expose the truth and lose everything, or keep quiet and live with it. What about your real parents? They died in a car accident 5 years ago, still searching for their daughter. She picked up her suitcases. Where are you going? I asked. To find out who I really am. Dad kept records of other children. Other switches. My phone buzzed. The lawyer. Your father left you something after all. Check your childhood bedroom closet. The floorboard under the window. I raced home, pried up the board. Inside was a metal box containing dozens of photographs. All different children, all with dates and locations on the back. The last photo stopped my heart. It was me at age 2, but the name on the back wasn't mine. My phone rang. Celeste, don't trust anyone, she said. Especially not Mom. Check the date on your photo. I flipped it over. March 1997. Now check when Mom married Dad, Celeste continued. My hands shook as I Googled their marriage certificate. June 1997, 3 months after the photo was taken. She wasn't our mother, Celeste said. She was Dad's accomplice. She helped steal us. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Sweetheart? Mom's voice called. I heard you come in. We need to talk about your father's will. The doorknob turned. Don't let her know you know, Celeste whispered urgently. Act normal. I'm sending help. The line went dead. Mom stood in the doorway, her familiar smile now sinister in the hallway light. Find anything interesting? She asked, her eyes fixed on the photos scattered across my floor. That's when I noticed the syringe in her hand. Time slowed. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but my legs felt like concrete. The syringe caught the light, clear liquid, needle uncapped. Ready. Mom? I managed, my voice cracking like I was 12 again. Don't call me that. Her voice was flat, cold, nothing like the woman who'd made me chicken soup when I was sick. You know better now. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Celeste said she was sending help, but help from where? The police? How long would that take? The photos, she continued, stepping into my room. Your father was supposed to destroy those years ago. Sentimental fool. Who am I? The question fell out of my mouth. She tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle piece she couldn't quite place. You were supposed to be Ashley Morrison, 3 years old, taken from a grocery store parking lot in Portland while your real mother loaded groceries? She stepped closer. Your parents spent their life savings looking for you. Died broke and heartbroken. The room spun. Ashley Morrison. That name meant nothing to me, but hearing it felt like a punch to the gut. Why? I whispered. Money, obviously. Do you have any idea what people will pay for the right child? Blonde hair, blue eyes, no obvious defects? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your father started small, one child here, one there, but the demand was incredible. I backed toward the window, my hands shaking. The metal box lay open between us, photographs spilled across my childhood carpet, evidence of dozens of stolen lives. You can't just kill me, I said. People will ask questions. Suicide, she replied matter-of-factly. You discovered your father's terrible secret. Couldn't live with the guilt of inheriting blood money. Very believable, considering your history with depression. I'd never been depressed, but I realized she'd been building this story for years. All those times she'd told doctors I seemed sad, all those concerned conversations with family friends about my struggles. Celeste got away, I said, hoping to buy time. Celeste was always too smart for her own good, but she made a mistake calling you. We've been tracking her phone for hours. My blood froze. What did you do to her? Nothing yet. She's surprisingly resourceful, but she'll come back for you. She always was protective of her little sister, even though you're not really sisters. The way she said it, like we were just merchandise, made something snap inside me. This woman had raised me, fed me, comforted me when I had nightmares. And it was all a lie. Who else knows? I asked. About the business? Your father's brothers. A few key investors. The lawyers who handled the paperwork. She shrugged. It's more common than you'd think. A network. This wasn't just my father's twisted hobby. It was an organization. The safety deposit box, I realized. You wanted my brother to find it. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the mother I'd known. He's not actually your brother, you know. Different family, different state. But yes, we needed someone to discover the truth gradually. Creates a more believable timeline for your suicide. Then why give Celeste everything? Because she's the perfect fall guy. The stolen child who inherited the criminal enterprise. When you kill yourself and leave behind a note explaining everything, she'll take the blame for the entire operation. Very neat. My phone, still in my hand, suddenly buzzed with a text. Mom's eyes flicked to it and I saw my chance. I dove sideways, rolling behind my old desk as she lunged forward with the syringe. The needle caught my sleeve, tearing fabric but missing skin. Help me! I screamed, hoping neighbors would hear. She was on me immediately, stronger than I'd expected. We struggled on the floor and I could smell her perfume, the same scent I'd found comforting my entire life. The syringe clattered across the hardwood. I scrambled toward it, but she grabbed my ankle, dragging me back. Her nails dug into my skin, drawing blood. You ungrateful little bitch, she hissed. Do you have any idea what we gave you? A beautiful life, a loving family, college education, built on kidnapping children. I kicked at her face, connecting with her nose. She yelped and released me. I lunged for the syringe, but she was faster. Her hand closed around it just as sirens wailed in the distance. We both froze. Celeste, I breathed. Mom's face contorted with rage. She raised the syringe, aiming for my neck. The front door exploded inward. Police! Drop the weapon! She hesitated for just a second, long enough for me to roll away. 2 officers charged up the stairs, weapons drawn. Drop it now! Mom looked at the syringe in her hand, then at me, then at the photos scattered around us. For a moment, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, maybe even regret. Then she smiled. You'll never understand what we built, she said calmly, what we saved you from. Before anyone could react, she plunged the syringe into her own neck. The officers tackled her, but it was too late. Whatever was in that needle worked fast. Her eyes rolled back and she convulsed once before going still. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by the wreckage of my entire life, while paramedics worked frantically to save the only mother I'd ever known. They couldn't. 3 hours later, I sat in a police station conference room, staring at a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Detective Rodriguez had kind eyes, but I could see the horror in them as she flipped through the photographs from Dad's metal box. We're going to need you to go through these, she said gently. Help us identify as many children as possible. I nodded, though the thought made me sick. What about Celeste? Safe. She's the one who called us. Had been watching your house for hours, waiting for backup. Rodriguez leaned forward. She saved your life. Where is she? FBI has her. This is bigger than just your family. We're talking about a trafficking network that's been operating for over 30 years. 30 years. How many children? How many families destroyed? What happens to me now? Rodriguez's expression softened. Honestly, I don't know. Legally, you're still you, the identity you've lived your whole life. But there are resources, support groups, therapy. What about the money, the estate? That's complicated. Technically, it's proceeds from criminal activity. But you're also a victim. She closed the photo folder. There will be lawsuits. Lots of them. Families of the victims will want compensation. I thought about the house I'd grown up in, the college fund that had paid my tuition, every comfort of my childhood purchased with someone else's misery. I don't want any of it, I said. You might change your mind. This kind of trauma, it takes time to process. But I was certain. I wanted nothing that came from stolen children. 2 weeks later, I met Celeste at a coffee shop 3 towns over. She looked different, thinner, older. We sat across from each other like strangers, which I guess we were. How are you holding up? She asked. I don't know how to answer that. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. She nodded. I've had years to process it. You're just beginning. The FBI agent said you've been helping them identify other victims. 27 children so far, all taken between 1985 and 2010. Her coffee sat untouched. Some of them don't even know. They're living normal lives with families who bought them as babies. The thought was staggering. People out there who had no idea they'd been stolen. Are you going to tell them? I don't know. How do you destroy someone's entire sense of identity to give closure to families who might already be dead? I understood the dilemma. Part of me wished I'd never found that metal box, never learned the truth about Ashley Morrison. I've been thinking about changing my name, I said, going back to Ashley. Celeste looked surprised. Why? It's who I really am, isn't it? No, you're who you've always been. A name is just a word. Your experiences, your personality, your relationships, that's what makes you real. She was right, but it didn't make the confusion any easier. The FBI wants to put us in witness protection, she continued. There are still people involved who haven't been caught. Dad's brothers, the lawyers, some of the buyers. Buyers? The people who purchased children. Most of them genuinely believed they were going through legitimate adoption agencies, but some knew the truth and paid extra for the discretion. I felt sick. We weren't just victims. We were commodities. I'm not hiding, I said. I'm done living lies. Celeste smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next few months, we became the public faces of the investigation. Our story made national news. Sisters who weren't really sisters, exposing a child trafficking network that had operated in plain sight for decades. The media attention was brutal. Reporters camped outside my apartment. Strangers sent messages claiming to be my real family. Conspiracy theorists accused us of making everything up for money. But good things happened too. A woman in Ohio recognized her daughter in one of Dad's photos. They'd been separated when the girl was 4. Now she was 32, with children of her own. Their reunion made me cry for hours. A man in Texas discovered his deceased son was alive and well, living in California as someone else's child. The son had always felt out of place in his adopted family. Learning the truth explained so much. Not all the reunions were happy. Some families had imploded from the years of searching and grief. Some of the stolen children rejected their biological families, feeling loyal to the people who'd raised them. I understood that conflict intimately. 6 months after Mom's death, I received a letter from Ashley Morrison's aunt, my biological mother's sister. She was the only remaining family member she wanted to meet. I almost didn't go. What was the point? The people who'd grieved for Ashley Morrison were gone. I couldn't bring them back or ease their suffering. But curiosity won. Aunt Patricia lived in a small house in Portland, surrounded by photos of a little girl I didn't recognize, but whose face was undeniably mine. Ashley at 1 year old. Ashley learning to walk. Ashley's 3rd birthday party, the day before she disappeared. You have your mother's eyes, Patricia said, wiping tears from her cheek, but your father's stubborn chin. She showed me more photos. My biological parents on their wedding day. Mom pregnant with me. The whole family at Christmas. They looked happy, normal. Nothing like the elaborate wealth I'd grown up with. They never gave up hope, Patricia continued. Even when the police said you were probably dead, they kept your room exactly the same, celebrated your birthday every year. The guilt was overwhelming. While my real parents had been suffering, I'd been living a privileged life with their daughter's kidnappers. I'm sorry, I whispered. Patricia took my hand. You have nothing to be sorry for. You were a baby. None of this was your choice, but it felt like my choice now. Every day I chose to keep the name and life that had been built on someone else's tragedy. Would you like to see your parents' house? She asked. I almost said no. It seemed too painful, too late. But I found myself nodding. The house was smaller than I'd expected. A modest 2-bedroom in a working-class neighborhood. Patricia had kept it as a memorial, unchanged since my parents died. My childhood bedroom was frozen in time. Pink walls with white furniture, stuffed animals lined up on the bed, a growth chart on the doorframe that stopped at 3 feet tall. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of me, the same photo Dad had kept in his metal box, but this version was different. Loved. The frame was worn smooth from handling. The glass was clean, as if someone had kissed it regularly. I broke down completely. Patricia held me while I sobbed, and for a moment I could almost imagine this was my real mother. The life I should have had. They would have been so proud of you, she said, for surviving, for speaking out, for helping other families find their children. I wanted to believe that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd failed them by living such a privileged life while they'd died brokenhearted. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a press conference. I want to make something clear, I said into the cameras. I didn't expose this trafficking network to be a hero. I did it because I discovered I was living on blood money, and I couldn't continue. I paused, looking directly into the lens. But speaking out isn't enough. I've decided to donate my entire inheritance, every penny from my father's estate, to organizations that help find missing children and support trafficking victims. The reporters erupted with questions, but I continued. Furthermore, I'm establishing the Ashley Morrison Foundation, named after the little girl who was stolen from a Portland parking lot 30 years ago. We'll provide resources for families searching for missing children and support for victims who've been recovered. After the press conference, Celeste found me in the parking lot. That was incredibly stupid, she said. Why? Because now you have nothing. No safety net. No security. I looked at her. This woman who'd been my sister but wasn't my sister, who'd been through hell but still had more strength than anyone I knew. Good, I said. I don't want security that came from stealing children. She stared at me for a long moment, then smiled. Dad underestimated us, didn't he? What do you mean? He thought he could control us even from the grave, make us complicit in his crimes by leaving us his money, force us to choose between comfort and conscience. She was right. Even dead, he'd tried to manipulate us one final time. Well, I said, fuck his plans. Celeste laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd heard from her since this nightmare began. I've made a decision too, she said. I'm donating my inheritance as well. All of it. I stared at her. Are you serious? Dad left me everything because he thought I'd be too scared to speak out. Thought I'd protect the money to protect myself. She shook her head. He didn't know me at all. We stood there in the parking lot. Two women who weren't really sisters, but had survived the same nightmare. We were broke now, but we were free. The foundation took months to establish. I had to learn about nonprofits and tax law and fundraising. Patricia helped, using her contacts from years of volunteer work with missing children organizations. Celeste moved back to town and took a job as a victim advocate. Her experience navigating the system as a trafficking survivor made her invaluable to other victims. My brother, who still felt like my brother despite everything, decided to become a private investigator specializing in cold cases. The evidence from Dad's safety deposit box had given him a crash course in following paper trails and connecting seemingly unrelated clues. None of us used our original last names anymore. Too much baggage, too many painful associations. I chose Morrison, for the parents who'd never stopped loving a daughter they'd lost. For the little girl who died the day she was stolen, even though her body had kept growing. A year after the foundation launched, we'd helped locate 6 missing children and connected 4 victims with their biological families. It wasn't nearly enough, but it was a start. The media attention had mostly died down, though I still got occasional interview requests from documentarians and true crime podcasters. I turned most of them down. This wasn't entertainment, it was real people's lives. But I agreed to appear on one show, a reunion special featuring families who'd been reunited because of our investigation. Sitting in the studio, watching parents embrace children they'd thought were lost forever, I finally understood something important. I wasn't Ashley Morrison. I wasn't the daughter they'd grieved for 30 years. That little girl was gone, her potential life stolen by monsters who'd seen her as merchandise. But I was something else, someone new, built from their love and loss, shaped by their memory, carrying forward their hope that missing children could still come home. The reporter asked me the same question everyone asks: do you ever regret speaking out? Giving up your comfortable life? I looked at the families around me, parents and children awkwardly learning to love each other again, siblings trying to bridge decades of separation, grandparents meeting grandchildren for the first time. No, I said. I regret that it took me 27 years to tell the truth, but I'll spend the rest of my life making up for lost time. After the show, a woman approached me. She was about my age with tired eyes and nervous hands. Excuse me, she said quietly. I think I might be one of them, one of the stolen children. My heart clenched. Even now, almost 2 years later, people were still coming forward, still discovering that their entire lives had been built on lies. What makes you think that? I asked gently. I never looked like my family, always felt out of place. Then I saw your story on the news and started asking questions. Her voice was barely a whisper. My parents got defensive, said I was being ridiculous, but I found some old documents in their attic. She handed me a folder. Inside were adoption papers, but not the legitimate kind. These had the same law firm letterhead I'd learned to recognize, the same fake signatures from attorneys who'd been arrested 6 months ago. Another victim, another family destroyed by Dad's network. What's your name? I asked. Rebecca Chen. But I think, she swallowed hard. I think I might be someone else. I took her hand. Would you like to find out? The process was always painful. DNA tests, database searches, interviews with families who'd reported missing children decades ago. Some searches ended with joyful reunions. Others ended with the discovery that birth parents had died, taking their hope with them to the grave. Rebecca's story fell somewhere in between. We found her biological family in Michigan, parents who'd never stopped looking, siblings who'd grown up with her ghost haunting every family gathering. But the reunion was complicated. Rebecca had been taken at age 5, old enough to remember them, but young enough to have formed deep bonds with her adoptive family. Her adoptive parents had genuinely believed they were rescuing an orphan from overseas. When confronted with the evidence, they were horrified. But they were also terrified of losing the daughter they'd raised for 25 years. Rebecca was torn between 2 families, 2 histories, 2 versions of herself. I understood that pain intimately. How do you choose? She asked me during one of our support group meetings. You don't, I said. You figure out how to honor both parts of your story, the little girl who was taken and the woman you became. It wasn't perfect advice. Nothing about this situation was perfect, but it was honest. 3 years after Dad's death, the last of his accomplices was finally arrested. Uncle Thomas had been hiding in Mexico, living off money from the trafficking network. His capture made headlines because he was found with detailed records of over 100 stolen children. 100 children. The scope of what they'd done kept growing. By then, the foundation had helped reunite 32 families and provided support services to over 200 victims. We'd opened offices in 4 states and partnered with law enforcement agencies across the country, but the work was exhausting. Every success was shadowed by tragedy. For every child who came home, there were dozens still missing. For every family reunited, there were others who'd been destroyed by decades of grief. I was burning out. Celeste noticed first. She found me crying in the foundation office at 2 a.m., surrounded by case files and photos of missing children. You can't save them all, she said gently. I know that, but I have to try. Why? Because you think you owe a debt for the life you had? I looked at her. This woman who'd become more of a sister to me than anyone I'd grown up with. Don't you? I used to. But then I realized something. She sat down across from my desk. We were children, victims. We survived something horrible, and we chose to help other people survive it too. That doesn't make us responsible for fixing everything that's broken. She was right. But guilt isn't rational. Every night, I went to sleep thinking about the children still out there, still missing, still hoping someone would find them. You need a break, Celeste continued. When's the last time you did something for yourself? Something that had nothing to do with missing children or trafficking victims? I couldn't remember. Take a vacation, she insisted. Go somewhere peaceful. Let the rest of us handle things for a while. I resisted at first, but she was relentless. Eventually, she booked me a cabin in Montana. No internet, no cell service, no way to obsess over case files. The first few days were torture. I paced the small cabin like a caged animal, convinced that without my constant attention, the foundation would collapse and children would die. But slowly, the silence worked its magic. I remembered what it felt like to think about something other than trafficking networks and missing persons reports. I read novels for the first time in years, took long walks through the forest, slept 8 hours a night without nightmares about stolen children. On my last day there, I received a satellite phone call from Patricia. There's something you need to know, she said. We found a letter from your mother. She wrote it the day you disappeared. My stomach dropped. What kind of letter? To you. To Ashley. In case. Her voice broke. In case they never found you. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. What does it say? I think you should read it yourself. I'm sending it with Celeste. She's driving up to get you. The next few hours crawled by. When Celeste finally arrived, she looked at me with something like pity in her eyes. Are you sure you're ready for this? She asked, holding out an envelope yellowed with age. I wasn't sure, but I took the letter anyway. My dearest Ashley, I'm writing this on the worst day of my life, hoping I'll never have to give it to you. But if you're reading this, it means we found each other again somehow. I want you to know that losing you broke us. Your daddy and I will never be the same. But I also want you to know that we don't blame you for whatever happened. You were just a baby. None of this was your fault. If someone took you and raised you as their own, I hope they loved you. I hope they gave you birthday parties and bedtime stories and helped you with your homework. I hope you felt wanted and safe, even though you weren't with us. I know this might be confusing. You might not remember us. You might love the people who raised you more than the strangers who claim to be your real parents. That's okay. Love isn't something you owe. It's something you feel. All I want is for you to be happy. If you grew up happy, then something good came from this nightmare. If you didn't, then I'm so sorry we couldn't protect you. You don't have to feel guilty for living without us. You don't have to feel guilty for surviving. Just live, sweetheart. Live the biggest, brightest life you can. Make choices that bring you joy. Help people when you can, but don't sacrifice your own happiness to fix things that aren't your responsibility. We love you. We always loved you. Whether you're 3 years old or 30, whether you remember us or not, whether we ever see you again or not, you are loved. Your first mother, Linda Morrison. I read the letter 3 times before I could speak. When I finally looked up, Celeste was crying too. She knew, I whispered. She knew I might never remember her, never love her back, and she was okay with it. She loved you enough to want you to be happy, even if that happiness didn't include her. The letter changed something fundamental in me. The crushing guilt that had driven me for 3 years began to ease. My biological mother, Linda Morrison, had given me permission to live without carrying her pain. But I also realized something else. The work I'd been doing, the foundation, the victim advocacy, the reunions. It hadn't been about guilt or obligation. It had been about love. Love for the children still missing. Love for the families still searching. Love for the survivors still struggling to put their lives back together. And that love didn't require me to destroy myself in the process. When I returned to work, I made changes. I hired more staff, delegated responsibilities, and established boundaries between my personal life and the foundation's mission. I started therapy to deal with my own trauma instead of just focusing on everyone else's. Most importantly, I stopped trying to be Ashley Morrison and accepted that I was someone new entirely. Someone shaped by both love and loss, but not defined by either. The foundation continued to grow. 5 years after we'd started, we'd helped over 300 families and supported more than 1,000 survivors. We'd worked with international organizations to combat child trafficking in other countries. We'd lobbied for better laws and improved resources for missing children cases. But the work that meant the most to me was smaller, quieter. The support groups where survivors shared their stories, the therapy programs that helped victims process their trauma, the safe houses where recovered children could adjust to their new realities. Because I'd learned something important. Healing happens one person at a time, one conversation at a time, one small act of kindness at a time. During the Foundation's 5th anniversary gala, I stood at the podium looking out at faces I'd come to know well. Survivors and their families, law enforcement officers who'd become allies, donors who'd chosen to turn tragedy into hope. When I first learned the truth about my childhood, I began. I wanted to give back everything that had been built on blood money. I wanted to erase the life I'd lived and start over as someone else. The room was silent, attentive. But I've learned that you can't erase the past. You can only choose what to do with it. You can let it destroy you, or you can use it to build something better. I paused, thinking about Linda Morrison's letter, about the grace of a mother who'd loved her child enough to want her to be happy, even with strangers. The children we help find aren't coming back to the families they left. Too much time has passed for that. They're meeting for the first time as the people they've become. That can be beautiful, but it's also complicated and sometimes painful. A few people in the audience nodded. They understood. What I've learned from 5 years of reunion work is this. Family isn't just about DNA. It's about choice, about showing up for each other, about loving someone enough to want what's best for them, even when that's hard. I looked at Celeste, sitting in the front row, at my brother, who'd driven in from 3 states away, at Patricia, who'd become like a grandmother to me, at Rebecca Chen, and dozens of other survivors who'd become chosen family. The people who stole us thought they were buying children, but what they actually did was create a community of survivors who understand each other in ways no one else can. They tried to isolate us, but we found each other anyway. The applause was warm, genuine, but what mattered more to me were the tears I saw in the audience. Recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement that we'd all survived something together. After the event, I walked outside to get some air. The city was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt something like contentment. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I think I might be one of the children in your father's photos. Can we talk?" I looked at the message for a long moment. 5 years ago, it would have sent me into a panic of urgency. I would have called immediately, stayed up all night researching, driven myself to exhaustion, trying to solve this new mystery. Instead, I took a deep breath and typed back, "Of course. The foundation offices are open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We have counselors who specialize in helping people navigate these discoveries. You're not alone." Then I put my phone away and walked home to the small apartment I'd bought with money I'd earned myself, to the life I'd built without blood money or stolen identity. I wasn't Ashley Morrison, the little girl who'd been taken from a Portland parking lot. I wasn't the daughter who'd grown up in a mansion built on trafficking money either. I was someone new, someone who'd chosen to take the worst thing that had ever happened to her and use it to help other people find their way home. It wasn't the life anyone had planned for me, but it was mine, and it was enough. As I unlocked my door, I thought about Linda Morrison's letter one more time. Her wish for me to live the biggest, brightest life I could, to help people when I could, but not to sacrifice my own happiness trying to fix things that weren't my responsibility. I'd finally learned how to do both. Tomorrow there would be another survivor reaching out for help, another family hoping for news about a missing child, another impossible situation that needed both professional expertise and human compassion. But tonight, I was just a woman who'd survived something terrible and chosen to use that survival to build something good. I was someone who'd learned that love, real love, isn't about possession or control or blood relation. It's about showing up, about choosing each other, again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I turned on the lights in my apartment and saw photos covering my refrigerator. Not stolen children or missing persons reports, but pictures of chosen family. Celeste at her college graduation, getting her degree in social work at 35. My brother on his wedding day, marrying a wonderful woman he'd met through his investigation work. Patricia teaching art classes to kids at the community center. Rebecca Chen with her biological siblings at their first Christmas together. Marcus Williams, another trafficking survivor, at the opening of his law practice specializing in victim advocacy. Dr. Fitzgerald, the therapist who'd helped me understand that healing wasn't linear. Dozens of people whose lives had intersected with mine through tragedy, but who'd chosen to stay connected through hope. This was what family looked like when you built it yourself. Messy and complicated, and not at all what anyone had planned, but real in ways that blood and law could never be. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down at my kitchen table, where I'd left Linda Morrison's letter. I reread it one more time, as I did whenever I needed reminding that love could survive anything, even the worst kind of loss. Then I wrote my own letter. To the little girl who'd been stolen 30 years ago. To the woman I'd become, to all the children still missing and all the families still searching. We can't change what was taken from us, I wrote, but we can choose what we do with what remains. It was a good life, hard-won and honestly earned and built on choices rather than circumstances. It was enough, more than enough. It was mine.